Let's rock, baby.
The Devil May Cry series is one of my personal favorite video game franchises of all time, and all that started with the first game. Admittedly, speaking as a longtime fan, the series is kind of a mixed bag in terms of quality, and all that started with the first game, Devil May Cry, released in 2001 by Capcom on the PlayStation 2. The game originally started as a sequel to Resident Evil 3, but was quickly changed to be a separate release. Now titled Devil May Cry, the game isn't wholly original, being based on, or more accurately, loosely inspired by, the 1321 poem The Divine Comedy. Starring and written by Dante Alighieri, along with characters Beatrice Portinari and the ghost of Publius Vergilius Maro. Add those references on top of the first Blade movie, and you basically get Devil May Cry 1. All that heavy action, one-liners that don't always make sense, and even the part about the hero's mom trying to seduce him and is like working for the bad guys.
I'm your mother. You wouldn't hurt your mother, would you? Come here.
I must release you.
Yeah, it's just like Blade. It should also be said, like almost everything at the time, there is a heavy Matrix influence here too. To be honest, I just really can't recommend this game. The series, and this game in particular, will be known for its challenging difficulty, but in a lot of cases, it's not really intentional. And because of that, the game can be a real pain in the ass to play. First of all, let's start in the sweet spot, the combat. Generally, it's a lot of fun, but takes a little while to get the hang of. And nowhere in any of these games does it tell you that jumping is the easiest way to dodge an attack. Dante's jumping animation has a couple of frames where he's invincible. Finding that out is pretty critical to getting the hang of the combat in any of these games. Pretty much all the weapon designs in this game are also super cool. Alistair is a big lightning sword with the edgiest introduction in PlayStation 2 history. It doesn't really get much cooler than that. Oh wait, he has boxing gloves now? And they're on fire? Ebony and Ivory are pimped out twin 1911s with extended barrels. I love these guns so much. Believe me, there's a lot of fun toys to play around with in this game, and that really is what the fans of this game talk about enjoying so much. However, there are more than just a few cases where the game itself, or in a more realistic context, the developers, get in the way of enjoying the exciting high-paced combat. Exhibit A. The god-awful platforming sections. When you start playing this game, you're going to realize really fast that the platforming and exploring the game wants you to do in between these monster fights are really half-assed, to put it mildly. There wasn't much thought put into these parts of the game, to put it in other words. Remember how I said the game was originally going to be a Resident Evil game? Well, Capcom cut a few corners in the development and decided to reuse assets from the older Resident Evil games. I think the fixed PlayStation 1 era camera angles are the most blatant example. Put it simply, the hardest part of the first 4 Devil May Cry games are the fixed camera angles, without question. Look, it's one thing to be hit by an attack that you can't see coming because an enemy's off screen, but these camera angles change the controls too. Even if you're walking down a corridor or a hallway, the camera angles as well as your controls are going to change. Is this a big deal? It wouldn't be if like 60% of Dante's attacks didn't depend on him being locked onto an enemy. On top of that, you have to press forward or backward to use Dante's signature moves like drive and high time, but that's not up or down on your controller, that's toward the locked on enemy depending on which camera angle the game is using. Change the player's controls in the middle of a fight if the player's in a room with more than one camera angle. On a small tangent, how come in every other game, lock-on is used to keep an enemy on screen for the player, but Devil May Cry seems to be the only series that you can lock onto an enemy and they still won't show up on screen? What is the point of this? Exhibit B, the puzzles. Another holdover from Capcom's more popular franchise, Resident Evil, are puzzles, generally used to mark progression and keep the player moving in a more slower-paced survival horror style game. These Resident Evil style puzzles are more like finding a key and then finding the door it opens. Now, do any of these keys appear as keys or even hint that they might open something? Most of the time, no. Are they filled with references to the deeper lore of the series? Most of the time, no. They really don't fit in this faster paced hack and slash style game and are not really remembered fondly by fans if they're remembered at all. Moving past that, a big motivator for me, at least when I first played this game as a kid, was the story. I thought the way Dante acted in the first scene was so cool, but I soon realized that that was about the only story that you get until like the 15th level. Sure, there might be a scene here or there along the way or before a boss fight, but not one where anyone says anything to anyone else. And even on the off chance that Dante says a one-liner before a boss fight, it's usually not very witty or well written. I think before fighting the first boss, Dante essentially says, "I know you are, but what am I?"
Finally! I was getting tired of playing your childish games.
Honestly, these lines come off a little too childish in a game rated M with all this edgy blood and shooting with menus that sound like this. To be honest, the story in general is not that great. Dante is essentially the world's biggest simp in this game. Trish shows up out of nowhere, trashes his house, that he also works out of, and tries to kill him. Then this harlot has the nerve to say this.
It seems that way, but I'm not your enemy.
So Dante decides to follow her to an undisclosed island that could not be a more obvious trap.
Come on, let's go! Huh!
Even at the end of the game, when Dante kills just about everything on the island, Trish tries to kill him a second time. But after that, she's about to die from some rock or something, and of course, Sir Lancelot, Dante runs in to go save her, and then kind of, talks a little shit, chastises her a little bit. He gives her this whole speech about how she looks like his mom, but she's evil on the inside, and it's all very melodramatic. But when you stop and think about it, Trish is basically like an evil clone of Dante's mother, at least effectively from a writing perspective. So why is she the sexy dressed poster girl for this game? And I mean that in both ways. Why is the art for the game trying to get the audience to ogle the main character's mom effectively? And why was her appearance out of anyone's used as the honeypot or bait to lure Dante to Mallet Island? Malay Island? Not really sure how you're supposed to say it. I think I might know the answer to at least one of those questions. This is Hideki Kamiya, lead director of the first Devil May Cry game, and I think the Oedipus complex Dante is implied to have in this game might have been Kamiya bleeding on the page a little too much, so to speak. While I'm not a fan of the writing of this game, I do think it's worth clarifying that the biggest reason this game's story gets made fun of so often is because of the bad English dub. Now, I want to be super clear. I am the first guy in line for an English dub. I really hate reading anime or subtitles in a game. I'm not a subtitle reading snob at all. But there are a couple lines in this game that I think just had to have played better in Japanese, because everything in this game is played straight. The most infamous scene in the game is played totally straight and kind of became one of the first viral videos on YouTube.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
But only in English. Now, you really can't talk about this game without talking about the bosses. There are about 4 bosses, not including the final boss, and they're a super mixed bag. The first couple are pretty cool, relatively speaking. Phantom was a wake-up call, and fighting the camera is the hardest part about the Griffin fights. But the Nello Angelo fights are the real high points of this game. Pretty much the coolest boss in this game, Nello Angelo will have you breathing easier knowing he's also probably the easiest boss. But the real problem is Nightmare, the absolute perfect name for hands down the worst boss in the series. I don't want to sound super arrogant by saying Nightmare is objectively horrible boss design. It's the worst boss in all 6 games, bar none. The way to fight this boss? By hitting the walls. Can you fit Dante, Nightmare, and the target on the wall, all on screen at any given camera angle? Not all the time. I hope you're ready to get attacked by a claw that you can't see coming from off screen. As if Nightmare's sucker punch tactical design wasn't frustrating enough, he can swallow you up mid-fight and make you fight one of the multiple previous bosses you fought at the same time in a kind of pocket dimension. What's really frustrating about this is that you already have to fight every boss 3 times each just to complete a single playthrough of the game. And if you get swallowed up in any of the nightmare fights, then you will have to beat some bosses at least 4 times. It's one thing if you had really fast attacks or did a bunch of damage or had like a laser that reversed the player's controls or something, but when your boss takes a break and makes you fight multiple other bosses, it crosses the line into punishing territory, which is never fun, like by definition. My point is, I really would not recommend Devil May Cry 1 to anyone that hasn't played another Devil May Cry game and is interested enough to push through all the trouble you have to go through to get to the button mashing fun of this game. I can go on about Devil May Cry 1. Believe me, there's a lot of stuff I feel like I'm leaving out of this video just for brevity's sake. But I'm open to making another video about the game if anyone is interested in that.